Belfast, Northern Ireland. The card was one of the stellar attractions at the museum's recent exhibition of Titanic memorabilia, which was one of the most complete ever held anywhere. It attracted throngs of visitors fascinated with the opportunity to see anything connected with the legendary liner. The museum's maritime historian, Michael McCoffin, was not at all surprised at the exhibition's success.
As you know, there's, of course, a worldwide interest in Titanic. And in Belfast, the interest is particularly strong because, of course, the ship was built here.
The exhibit's piece de resistance was the actual shipbuilder's 30-foot model of the Titanic, built by Harland and Wolff before construction of the ship had begun. These builders' models served as guidelines as production proceeded and were accurate to the minutest detail. This model is valued in the millions of dollars. Other museums where Titanic items are on permanent display and prime attractions are in Liverpool and here at the Maritime Museum in Southampton, England. The quest to acquire newly discovered Titanic memorabilia at these museums never ceases. And while they display maritime artifacts from hundreds of ships, items connected with the Titanic are regarded as the most valuable. Undoubtedly, the most complete collection of Titanic material for sale can be found here in Southampton at a unique oceanliner shop called Cobwebs. The store's walls and shelves are jammed with over 5,000 items from many of the great but long-gone liners, such as the Lusitania, the Mauretania, right up to the QE2. But once again, the shop's customers who span the globe are most interested in items pertaining to the Titanic.
She's definitely the most fascinating ship. I mean, the films that have been made of her, the times it comes up in television or on a cinema screen or even on the radio or in books, the stories that have been written about the ship or about people that were on her or something like that, it just goes on. And I think it will for a long, long time to come.
Cobweb's collection of White Star Line items is impressive. These are all examples of the kinds of silver bowls, china plates, chamber pots, and other things that would have been used on the Titanic. But again, few, if any of these, actually came from the ship.
The easiest stuff to authenticate is paper, whether it's an invitation to the launch of the Titanic or a postcard posted from the ship or interior brochures. Or most of the stuff tends to be post-disaster, which means after April the 15th. All kinds of stuff was turned out then. That is very, very much collected. But pre-sinking stuff is getting very, very difficult. Because there's so much interest in Titanic stuff, everybody that's selling it at the moment is putting the price up, which is fair enough. But it is getting much more difficult, and it is getting much more expensive.
What is particularly interesting is that this fascination with Titanic memorabilia pertains to items that did not go down with the ship. Imagine the excitement if artifacts recovered from the Titanic after 75 years on the ocean floor were ever made available to private collectors. While the more than 900 items recovered from the Titanic are extraordinary treasures, there are still many rare items yet to be discovered. And one of them has a particularly interesting story. It starts at the turn of the century in London, in this building, which still houses one of the world's premier bookbinding firms, Sengorsky & Sutcliffe. For more than 87 years, skilled craftsmen here have been creating exotic and priceless bindings for rare books. In 1907, the firm began producing a series of exquisite jeweled book bindings, something that hadn't been done since the Middle Ages, when such books were made for princes and popes. The book they usually made this binding for was The Story of the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam. Their editions of these gold leaf books became so famous, they practically became their trademark. In 1909, they decided to produce the most sumptuous book binding the modern world had ever seen. And again, it would be a copy of the Rubaiyat, with a cover design featuring peacocks. Unfortunately, it was shipped to New York on the Titanic and still rests on the bottom of the Atlantic. Derek Allen, now the managing director of the firm, told me what made the book so special.
There are some nice monochrome photographs. There are the original working drawings, but there is nothing that gives us any real idea of what it looked like, of how sumptuous it really was. And that's what makes it a legend. It's physically quite an impressive book. It's 16 inches by 13 inches by 3 or 4 inches thick, and the binding is on a background of dark green leather, but is covered with something like 5,000 inlays and onlays of different coloured leathers, and on top of that 1,051 semi-precious precious stones, and on top of that something like 100 square feet of gold leaf. The effort of putting all those things together took one of the finest finishers, that's the man who does the actual gold tooling, 2 years of solid work. And you can also pick out here across the tails of the peacocks and around the edge and the eyes and the crests of the peacocks where the jewels were to be placed. The eyes in the tails of the peacocks were made of topazes, and their crests were turquoises, and their eyes were rubies. And each one of these grapes, I think there are sort of 250 of them around the border, was an amethyst. These inside leaves are dark brown. And this, as you can perhaps see, features a snake. And the odd jewel in the design, the 1051st, is an emerald in the eye of the snake. And it had ivory teeth. It is, I think, something, if we could only see it today, something that would be beyond compare. It is just a totally unique book.
Somewhere here in the Titanic, the jewel-bound copy of the Rubaiyat waits to be found. Valued at £1,000 in 1912, today the book would be a priceless treasure. Most certainly shipped in a watertight container, most experts believe it will have survived its 76-year wait on the ocean floor. Whether it will ever be recovered, only time will tell. But it is truly one of the most extraordinary treasures of the Titanic. The Titanic expedition of 1987 recovered some 900 artifacts, each a priceless treasure brought up from some 2.5 miles beneath the ocean floor. It's ironic that almost immediately after their recovery, the artifacts once again disappeared from view. Now, while many of them appeared to be in remarkably good condition, their outward appearance was somewhat deceiving. For if they were not tended to immediately, these treasures, which have been talked about and sought after for so many decades, would have immediately started to crumble in the hands that held them once again. Once returned from the ocean, these artifacts were packed in freshwater containers and protected from periods of long exposure to the air. These items have in essence been in a saltwater bath for 3/4 of a century. If the salts that permeated each piece were exposed to the hydrogen and oxygen in the air, the resulting chemical reaction would ultimately destroy the pieces. All of the artifacts recovered from the Titanic were eventually taken to the labs of EDF, Électricité de France, near Paris. At EDF, a unique preservation technique is used to restore these treasures to their former splendor. Each artifact is placed in a special solution, and then a controlled electric current is introduced to activate the chemical process. During the procedure, the salts and other potentially dangerous impurities are drawn out. Every artifact posed its own special challenge, especially an early aluminum megaphone which may have been used by the Titanic's captain to call out his final commands. It's still undergoing restoration. By returning the artifacts to nearly original condition, the most important aspect of the 1987 Titanic mission becomes apparent. A direct physical connection to the great liner has been established. Now, the potential for further study of the ship through its treasures is an exciting prospect for Titanic experts like historian Charles Sachs.
I think it's significant because it gives us a look of things from the ship since very little has survived. And it gives us something tangible to see and hold and look at. I mean, newspaper accounts is one thing, stories and recordings is another. But there's something about seeing the real objects, the real things that are from the ship. It's just like people say about the Tutankhamun collection. You can look at it in books, you can read about it, but when you can see the actual exhibit, see the real items, the awe and the beauty of the items really strikes you.
We know that the Titanic was filled with the best of everything available, items from Europe's most prestigious manufacturers, including the finest English bone china supplied by Royal Crown Derby, exquisite silver, and elegant crystal. But now we have learned that the ship also carried valuable items that previously were not known to have existed.
This is what was so special about this expedition, is that it found things on the Titanic that we had never seen before. Some historians and authors even said in the newspapers that, well, we know everything about the Titanic and there's no use to go down to the ship now because we know everything. That's not true. Because what was brought up from the Titanic, we have things that we had never seen before. The particular china made for the Titanic was also issued for other ships by Stonier. It's this brown and turquoise china. An unusual piece in my collection, we believe, is a relish dish. They brought the exact same piece up from the Titanic. Sadly, due to the conditions down there, the enamel work is almost all gone, but the White Star Line flag is quite evident in the design. It's hard to say how much that would be worth, but since it was brought up from the Titanic, 13,000 feet down, is almost like bringing back a stone from the moon. What would someone pay for that? I would tend to think, who knows, $25,000, $35,000, $50,000, because it's an unusual piece. It shows the wear from the ocean, and it was from the Titanic.
The Titanic's artifacts would be prized possessions in any collection, but these pieces will never be made available for purchase by private collectors. Still, it's only natural that there is speculation about the worth of the treasures, especially items like the cherub from the aft staircase in the first-class section.
The cherub from the Titanic has to probably be a couple $100,000 or $1 million. I mean, it would be like a Russian Easter egg, a Fabergé egg. I mean, there's a couple dozen of those. Here you have one, and it's very special, very unique, because it was first class, and it's a charming relic from that era.
In a sense, the 1987 Titanic expedition has enabled us to touch the past, to study and re-examine the ship and its era. But even now, with the mission behind us, is there still more to be learned from the Titanic?
The Titanic is probably one of the greatest time capsules in the world. One, it was a brand new ship when it sailed on its maiden voyage. It had not started its own self-destructive processes. It sunk in extremely deep ocean in extremely cold water. We know very little about what happens to different metals, different organic materials in the deep ocean. So the Titanic has been a 75-year capsule, a time capsule. Bringing back the items that we did from the Titanic site gives everyone in the world a chance to see the grandeur that was once this great ocean liner.
Now that they've been recovered, what will become of these rare artifacts from the Titanic? Well, plans are now in the works to send them out on tour, to give the people of the world an opportunity to see them firsthand, up close. In this way, these treasures of the Titanic will serve as a lasting memorial to the more than 1,500 men, women, and children who perished